Obviously, the addition to that, we also like to see when companies on a network and get the businesses on a network to use those tools that would really allow the businesses to put in order to get, especially the business owner. She indicated that a number of initiatives purposely aimed at
Please, I can't hear. Hello. Please, I can't hear you.
I don't think he has started yet to.
Oh, okay.
All right, so I'm saying that we have technically gone through some topics of costing. We have gone through some topics of costing techniques. That is instances where the management accountant is in a dilemma as to how to determine cost per unit of a product or a service. We have gone through techniques such as absorption costing, activity-based costing. We have gone through life cycle costing, and today we are going to look at environmental costing. But I've hinted that your examiner is not really a fan of environmental costing. But notwithstanding, so far as it's in your syllabus, you ought to know the issues pertaining to environmental costing. So I'm saying that this is going to be the last costing technique that we're going to look at. A student will go through the syllabus and also look at issues of relevant costing, and will ask that, but I can see relevant costing also in your syllabus, which I expect every student to go through the syllabus because I've already shared that document on the platform. As I tend to move, you also have to go through, then at least notwithstanding, doesn't mean that I'm not doing the right thing, but I really want you also to go through yourself so that at least you can see how I'm actually moving in that regard. So a student will go through relevant costing, that is in the syllabus. There's a topic there called relevant costing. A student will just say that probably you've talked about this costing technique, but you are saying that it's not part of it. That topic is under decision-making techniques, and we'll look at that when we get to that point. So the techniques that the management accountant needs in determining cost per unit of a product or a service, relevant costing is not part of it. We rather look at it in decision-making in that regard. So we have gone through costing techniques. In the case of absorption costing, activity-based costing, life cycle costing, we are looking at environmental costing. But when you go to your site, a lot of questions are in relation to AB, that is AC, what is absorption costing, activity-based costing, which is ABC, and lastly, that of, I can see somebody logging House and Rahman. Please do not share the link with friends. Do not share the link with friends. Right, let's proceed. So we are looking at environmental costing. Please and please again, when we were going through absorption costing, I gave you steps in determining cost per unit of a product or a service. Please try and master those steps. And whatever question you get, try to go by the steps. Then we move on to activity-based costing. Determine cost per unit of a product or service using ABC. We talked about cost pools, cost drivers. Please and please again, try as much as possible to master those steps. Then when we got to life cycle costing to determine cost per unit of a product or service using life cycle costing, you first of all have to determine all the costs which comes up based on the stages of life of the product. Then you accumulate the total. If we ask you to determine the life cycle cost per unit, you do that. With the document I shared, I make your colleague share on the platform. There was also an example, a past question from the CA website with a solution. Please try as much as possible to go through and familiarize yourself. As I've hinted, if you have any issue, please you get back. My technique is to take students through at the learning stage for them to get the ideas, the principles. Then when we finish with that, as we are going through by meeting 3 times a week, when we finish, we are really going to solve past questions only. We are really going to solve the questions without looking at issues of textbook. The textbook stage will end. They will now descend on past questions. So for now, I'm just giving you the idea. Then you can decide to go to the past question site or your website, download some of the past questions and try your hands on that. But I will really descend on question and answers after the tuition stage. So please bear with me and know also the strategy that I'm using. But notwithstanding, you can also adapt another strategy. That's not necessarily mean that you are supposed to also go by the same style. If you feel that there's another style which will also be good for you, you can decide to go by that, right? So environmental costing, environmental management accounting, that is EMA. Environmental costing became an important thing to look at because of our quest to meet the situations in the environment. Now, as we know for sure that there's no business which exists in a vacuum, there are instances where a business, as a result of giving something out of their profit back to the society, they can decide to embark on corporate social responsibility, that is CSR. And by doing that, they are going to come out with a project which is really going to help the environment, that is the community or the vicinity in which they tend to be, right? And by doing that, it can happen that it can have an alignment with already focus or objective of the government in there. The government can decide to give some subsidy to help such businesses to embark on such project. And it's really important for us to look at environmental costing. If we look at the environment, if we tend to be a corporate citizen, if we tend to say that we are a business, but we are part of the environment, then in terms of even production, you tend to produce products which are going to be environmentally friendly. So environmental costing became very important to look at before the year 2000, where accountants decided that we are supposed to look at the environment. We are not supposed to only look at the financial issues which will actually create profitability to the organization. Notwithstanding, issues such as non-financial measurements are also important to even boost the overall revenue of the organization. And I tell you, some customers or some individuals tends to appreciate companies which produces environmentally friendly product more than companies who actually tends out to constitute themselves and look at more of profit making products, right? So environmental management accounting, EMA, focuses on the efficient use of resources and the disposal of waste and effluent. In this chapter, we will discuss the types of costs faced by businesses and describe the different methods a business may use to account for these costs. So the importance of considering environmental costs. Why do we have to look at environmental costs? On the first day we had our meeting, our first lecture, I said that all the costing techniques, one, helps in cost control. So these are some of the benefits you can really write for the examiner without even considering or thinking about anything. We said that every costing technique, including marginal costing, absorption costing, activity-based costing, life cycle cost, or even environmental costing that we are looking at today. The one advantage is that it helps in cost control. Second advantage is that it helps in decision making. These are two straight advantages that a student can write pertaining to any of the costing techniques without even brainstorming, right? No, apart from that, we are saying that it is really, really important for the management accountant to look at environmental cost in some situations where there's going to be waste or there's going to be issues of pollution, the impact of these indicators on the environment can be disastrous. But it's important for the management accountant to look at costing pertaining to these elements. So if a company is wasteful in its resources, which we know for sure that we cannot guarantee efficiency. As you tend to work just like a normal human being, you are not perfect. As you tend to deal with issues, even in the case of machines, there can be faulty issues coming up in the case of machines. So we cannot guarantee 100% work to be done in that sense. So if a company is wasteful in its use of resources, or alternatively causes pollution, then this impacts in 3 ways. One, there's the direct cost to the company of spending more than is needed on resources, or having to spend more cleaning up the pollution. So we are saying that some environmental costs can be created as a result of waste or pollution. The second one is there is damage to the reputation of company, as consumers are becoming more and more environmentally aware. We are saying that it's important for us to look at environmental costing because of reputation that the company wants to obtain. Some companies want to be seen to be corporate citizens. They want to be seen to be part of the environment, and hence they do not want to damage the environment. And because some customers are also looking at environmental friendly product before they even engage into services with, it is now forcing a lot of businesses or companies to be environmentally friendly. And the last perspective is that there might be an issue of environmental regulations which will force us to look at environmental costing. There might be issues of, let's say, environmental regulations which will force us to look at environmental costing. So notwithstanding these issues, this point can also be conditions that will require environmental costing. Some of the conditions which will trigger the need for us to consider environmental costing is instances where we want to produce a product and we are looking at the impact of the product on the environment. In that case, you are not supposed to resort to absorption costing. You are not supposed to resort to activity-based costing. You are not supposed to resort to life cycle costing. Instead, you are to look at environmental costing in the case of a management accountant. So we have gone through costing techniques, but please, we do not all the time apply one specific costing technique at every time. It depends on the situation which you are looking at. So somebody can decide that maybe he or she wants to construct a borehole for, let's say, a particular maybe vicinity. And so far as having environmental impact, we expect that the management accountant to look at environmental costing. But if he decides to look at something else, we cannot force him that, oh, this is really having environmental impact. So technically, or whatever means, to use environmental costing. Right. So we are saying that there can be some environmental regulations which will call for the need for us to resort towards environmental costing. Now, if this sort of question should come in exam, it will not be different from what you have learned. Please and please note again, the other theories in the document which you are supposed to read. But if there's going to be a question on environmental costing, right, for testability perspective or focus, we are supposed to know that the question which we will get under environmental costing is going to be the valuation of direct material cost. So exam focus, let me just input in here, exam focus, whatever question you get under environmental costing, first of all, you're going to calculate direct material cost. So direct material costs. That is going to be the first thing to calculate. Second, there's going to be the calculation of direct labor costs. There's going to be a calculation of direct labor cost. And lastly, there's going to be a calculation of overhead cost. So overhead cost will be the next thing to calculate. So it is not, environmental costing is not a new thing, apart from the theories behind environmental costing topic. The calculation in terms of exams is technically the same as what we have looked at. Now, in the case of the overhead, let's watch it. In the case of the overhead, they can bring issues of what? Absorption costing, which is AC. They can bring issues of activity-based costing for you to determine the valuation of the overhead. In the case of labor cost, to calculate labor cost, we said that to calculate labor cost, it is the hours worked by labor. Hours worked by labor. Hours worked by labor times the rate per hour. Times the rate per hour. So that is how to calculate labor cost. If I want to calculate labor cost, I'm just looking at the hours worked by labor and the rate per hour. So if labor has worked for 2,000 hours, and for every 1 hour pay labor 2 Ghana cedi, then it's going to be 2 Ghana cedi times 2,000 hours, which will give the labor 4,000 Ghana cedi at the end of the period. In the case of material cost, per the rating which the examiner will give you, he can give it to you in terms of what units, the price per unit. Then in that case, I need the number of units they bought. That will help me determine the direct material cost. But he can also give me the rating in terms of kilogram, the materials in terms of kilograms, sorry. So if I give you, let's say, or if I tend to hint that the company is going to buy 5,000 kg of a material, and the price per kg has been given to you, let's say 5 Ghana cedi, then it's just a matter of what? Multiplying. It does not necessarily mean that all materials rating will be in, let's say, kilogram or will be in units. If it is the case of, let's say, seamstress, it is not going to be the case of a kilogram, but it's going to be in the case of, let's say, centimeters or meters. But if it is given the case of centimeters, then the rate should also be rate per centimeter. If it is given to you in the case of meters, the rate should be a rate per meter. If it is given to you, if the rate is given to you as a rate per meter, meanwhile the length has been given to you in centimeters, then you are supposed to convert the centimeters to meters before you can multiply by the rate per meter. So in terms of valuation of material cost, you are supposed to look at the rating that the examiner has given to you. If it gives you in terms of units, then you need the rate per unit. If it gives you in terms of kilogram, then you need the rate per kilogram. So direct material cost calculation will not pose a challenge for the student. Direct labor cost calculation will not pose a challenge for the student. But when we come to the overhead valuation, that is when we need the student to really recall issues of absorption costing and activity-based costing. So when questions like this comes in the exam, mostly in terms of past question, the examiner fuse environmental costing with life cycle costing or activity-based costing or an absorption costing. So students are to know the interrelationship between these topics. There hasn't been an instance, I've never seen a past question under environmental costing. I do not only teach ICAG, I teach ICAG, I teach ACCA, I teach CIMA in terms of management accounting. And I've not seen in any of these professional qualifications where there has been a sole or a full question under environmental costing. It is all the time related with any of the costing techniques that you have learned. So students are to know the interrelationship between these topics. And it's not technically going to be a different thing from what you have already seen. So this document, it is just giving you the theory aspect of environmental costing. Then lastly, there's a question under environmental costing, right? And life cycle costing beneath, that is the last P, that's P3. So please and please again, note for sure that this document is to just give you an idea about environmental costing. You just have to read on that to know what environmental costing is in terms of theory. But when it comes to calculation, it is technically what you have seen before. There's going to be, because if you are going to, let's say, construct a borehole, ladies and gentlemen, you are aware that you are going to incur material cost. You are going to incur labor cost. You use labor to do that job. If you are going to build a school for your community, you are supposed to incur material cost. You are to incur labor cost. You are going to incur overhead cost. So environmental projects will call for environmental costing, and it will determine, it will call for the management accountant to look at the material cost spent, the labor cost spent, and the overhead cost spent. So how you can calculate material cost, labor cost, overhead cost is technically the same here. So a student will say that the environmental costing should not be looked at, but it is important for us to consider it because of the theories behind it. If the examiner asks you the theories behind it, you should be able to write. I've stated clearly that nobody can pass this paper without having a good grasp of theories. If you go to your website, you realize that the questions are not totally 100% wholly or completely theory, or calculation. There's going to be some theories for you to deal with. And to pass the paper, for you to know that you are passing the paper, all the theory questions, you have to get them done. When we get to the revision stage, I'll show you how to use the point answering technique in answering the theoretical questions. So let's move on to the next subtopic, which is the typical environmental cost. So I'll take you through, then at least you keep yourself satisfied. But notwithstanding, as I stated, it depends on the type of project coming up on board. It is not going to happen that all product is going to be recycled. That sort of, no. It depends on the product. The characteristics of the product will tell you what to do. But our main objective of looking at environmental costing is to find ways of reducing waste, ways of preventing the negative impact of production on the environment. That is why we tend to look at environmental costing. Because if you tend to look at costs, you are trying to control costs. And with cost control, then you are going to find all means to eliminate waste, eliminate duplications of what? Activities. You are going to bring in issues of what? A total quality management. So the cost that comes to the mind of most people immediately are those relating to dealing with waste. However, there are many other costs that are likely to be just as important. For example, the amount of raw materials used in production. A publisher should consider ways of using less paper or recyclable paper as a way of saving costs for themselves as well as helping the environment. So we can also have issues like transportation costs, which can come in terms of what? The product. If the product is going to be purchased maybe at a particular warehouse, which is not in the premises of the organization, then in that case, the purchase costs, in that case, the material costs, let me just give it a hint over here. In that case, the material cost is going to be the purchase cost or the purchase price, or the purchase cost, plus any costs that will bring this material in a workable condition and location. A workable condition and location. What am I talking about? There can be costs, because if we want to determine the overall cost of the material, it's how much I bought it, and then how much you bought it is the purchase price. But sometimes you're going to incur some cost, just like a transportation cost, by moving the product from where you bought it to your warehouse. And that is any cost which will make the product what? In a workable condition location. Some cost can be issues like, let's say, shipping cost. And if you have shipping cost is what? A relevant cost. Because without shipping, you cannot get the product to be in your production site to you convert it to what? An output. You cannot do that. So these costs are relevant costs and supposed to be factored into the cost of the product. You cannot say that the cost of the product is only the purchase cost. Unless otherwise that where you bought the product from, they're actually going to give you free delivery services. If it is in that case, it might happen that maybe based on their costing techniques or their ways of business, they have already factored the delivery cost in your product. But if it is not so, and you're going to incur cost of shipping, then it's also important to add it to the cost of the material. There can be issues of, let's say, installation cost. Installation costs. There can be issues of what? Installation what? Cost. And the installation cost, maybe cost of even dismantling or removal, all these costs can be added to that. But in the case of what? Losses, normal loss can also be added as the cost of the material, but abnormal loss is actually going to be treated as an expenditure. It will not add it to the cost of the material. So ladies and gentlemen, if it happens that the product, the material you are using or you are buying to be used in the production turns out to have other costs which will bring the material into a workable condition location, then those ones are to be added to the purchase price to determine the overall material cost. Right. Different methods of accounting for environmental costing. We have a lot of methods that management accountants use in the determination of what environmental cost. Some use the inflow-outflow analysis. Some use flow cost accounting. I will explain. Some use life cycle costing, and some use environmental activity-based costing. So please, you look at it. It's very, very important for you to consider. Now, when you talk about inflow-outflow analysis, we are saying that this approach balances the quantity of resources that is input with the quantity that is output. We are talking about what we call garbage in, garbage out. We are looking at the balance of our input in terms of raw materials, giving us a corresponding what output. So here, what will cause a change, because we expect that if I input 10, I should get an output of 10, but it may not necessarily be in that perspective, because there can be issues of what waste or issues of evaporation affecting what the products in that regard. So we can use inflow, outflow analysis in terms of determining a measuring of the physical quantities in terms of the monetary value or in the regard of what inputs expecting to generate a corresponding output. So some individuals can look at it from that analysis that, oh, I'm looking at environmental costs, but in regard, I am supposed to look at the total value of inputs and the corresponding output which will come up. That will help you know the element of waste. And if it happens that whatever you inputted, let's say 50 is inputted, I end up getting 40, then 10 has been what? Element of waste. That will help you know how to develop your processes so that in your subsequent productions, you can now reduce what waste. Because if waste is created, it is going to have an adverse impact on the environment. Right. So some management accountants look at environmental cost in the case of the quantity they input and the quantity which will come out as output. If it happens that the waste is more, it gives them an indication of how to control their costs. Some look at it in the case of what they call a flow cost, just like the inflow and outflow perspective. But here we are saying that, but instead of applying simply to the business as a whole, it takes into account the organizational structure. So here we look at it in the case of what organizational structure. We do not look at it in the case of, let's say, the overall input and output from the overall company. We look at it based on small sections in terms of departmental perspective. We are not looking at it based on the overall company as assessment. We look at it based on every level of the organization. That is based on the organogram of the organization. And that determines what actually happens. If you visit, let's say, Coca-Cola, you realize that every department is having whatever they do in terms of production. So we have some individual who actually prepare the bottle. Some individual will be preparing the package, right? That is the paper element. Some people, in fact, we have individual who also maybe a process where they are going to wash the bottle. Each and every department has whatever they tend to do. And there can be waste created throughout every department. So some management accountants look at environmental costing in the case of organizational structure, and that would relate to what we call flow cost accounting. Inflow, outflow, look at the overall company perspective, input, quantity inputted, giving us a corresponding output. Flow costs, look at it just the same way, but here they do not look at it in the case of the overall company. Instead, in the case of a department, because they believe that the waste which has accumulated in total never came from the overall company, but every department will create bit by bit waste which is accumulated. If you look at it based on, oh, this department, this is the waste you have created, you can identify the cost to the waste and find ways of eliminating that. Not looking at it from the overall perspective, just like how inflow and outflow analysis tends to look at. We can also look at it based on life cycle costing. As we tend to develop the product, right from the development stage, there can be issues of waste created, which we can look at the impact of the product on the environment. At the design and development stage, you know for sure that there's going to be a lot of activities in there which might create waste. We can also look at the environmental costing in the case of activity-based costing, where we look at the environmental cost in the case of cost pools and cost drivers. So we can also look at that. Then I have a question over here, which is really theory. And I really want you to go through, right? That is XY company, a manufacturer of computer games, has developed a new game called the Manpack. This is an interactive 3D game and is the first of its kind to be introduced to the market. XY company is due to launch the Manpack in time for the peak selling season. Traditionally, XY company has priced its games based on standard manufacturing cost plus selling and administration cost plus a profit margin. However, the management team of XY company has recently attended computer games conference where everyone was talking about life cycle costing, target costing, and market-based pricing approaches. The team has returned from the conference and would like more details on the topics they heard about and how they could have applied to Manpack. So the first requirement is saying that we are supposed to discuss how the following techniques can be applied in the case of that. As I hinted, in the case of target costing, I'll give you a small idea about it, but it's not an issue to be looked at by the ICAG examiner. But you should just know for sure that when we talk about target cost, we are looking at the cost which is derived by the market, by not the basis of any other perspective. All the other costing techniques that you have learned, it is your company, management accountant, is your company who will sit down in your score or in your room or in your scoreboard and determine the cost. But when it comes to target costing, here you are going to ask the markets how the cost is going to be. And such a costing technique operates in a perfect competitive market where information is available to everybody. But it is not an issue of concern to the ICAG examiner, and hence students of ICAG are not supposed to give it of importance. Just know for sure that it's a course which is created when we tend to look at external analysis, that's the market analysis. But it is not an issue to be talked about by the examiner of ICAG. Then we have B and C in terms of pricing strategies. You look at pricing, but notwithstanding, please and please again, as I hinted, there wouldn't be any question under environmental costing without a combination with other costing techniques. So let's just know the intuition behind environmental costing. We said that environmental costing evolved because of the issue of companies trying to become environmentally friendly, trying to be a corporate citizen in that regard, and also instances where we realized that customers really wanted us to be environmentally friendly, or customers are actually shifting to organizations which are actually looking at the focus of the environment. So it became very important for us to look at environmental cost. In the case of theories, please, you can read. In fact, the information I've presented over here is okay for you in terms of the theoretical aspect of environmental costing. But when we come to the calculation, please, I'm saying that it is not anything new to you. It is not anything new to you because environmental costing comes in when we are coming out with environmental product. So if we want to build a clinic, let's say management accounting class of UPI 2020, because this time you're around, your exam is going to be written in December. If it happens that we as a team, we have established, let's say, an organization, and we want to give back to the society by building a clinic, then what will happen is that we are going to incur direct material costs, direct labor costs, overhead costs. In the case of absorption costing, activity-based costing, right? So this is where we are going to bring our meeting for today to an end in terms of environmental costing. You can visit your website and see if you can get questions on environmental costing. You realize that it is not an area of interest to the examiner. Notwithstanding, it is in the syllabus. Hence, we are supposed to get a good grasp of the theory and the calculation. If the calculation question is coming up, it is going to be the same as what we have actually gone through. Right. So if you have any issue, please, you can come out with it. Notwithstanding, as I promised, the solution to the first assignment, I'll upload it on the platform. I'll allow my friends